My topic is I want to talk a little bit about Tu Bishvat, both from halachic point of view and from, let's say, a philosophic point of view. Okay, what exactly Tu Bishvat is, and I would say what Tu Bishvat became, if you want to put it that way, and whether there's actually a basis for such in our tradition. So first of all, what is Bishvat? So in order to answer that question, let's go directly to the Mishnah. Can you see that? It says Mishnah of Rosh Hashanah. Okay, this is actually from the Talmud, but you know the Mishnah and the Talmud go together. So this is the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, and it talks about 4 Rosh Hashanahs, 4 beginnings of the year. So the Mishnah says there are 4 days in the year that serve as the new year. In this edition, by the way, everything which is not in bold print is interpretation on the text. So you should just realize that. The actual text says there are 4 New Years, period. But this particular edition, they add in words to make it easier to read. So there are 4 days in the year that serve as a Rosh Hashanah, as a new year, each for a different purpose. The first new year is the first day of Nisan, which is the new year for kings. Meaning from this date, the years of the kings of Israel's rule are counted. If you had a king of Israel, remember in antiquity, kings would always count according to the years that they're in power. And because there was no calendar, it would even say in the Bible, the 4th year of this king, the 6th year of that king. And this was done also not just by us. All countries did this. You have, for instance, Hanukkah happened, I think, in the 148th year of the Seleucid Empire. So it says in Josephus. So that's just the way things were done in antiquity. When did they count the Jewish kings? From the 1st of Nisan, because it's considered the beginning of the months. But it's not only the beginning of the months, for the kings, it's the beginning of their rule, of their reign. So the 1st of Nisan is when the kings count their years. It's also the beginning of the festivals, because the first festival is Pesach, of the pilgrim festivals. Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, which makes a lot of sense because our festivals really follow the agricultural year. The agricultural year starts with Pesach, which is the planting. That's why it's called the festival of the spring. Shavuot is called the festival of the harvest. It's usually May, June. Then Sukkot is the festival of the ingathering of the crops, which is right before the rainy season. In the rainy season, you already took the crops in to the silo, to the barn, wherever, and then it rains. And then next Nisan is again the beginning of the agricultural year. So all our festivals from the Torah follow the agricultural year. So it makes a lot of sense that Nisan is the beginning of the festivals and the beginning of the agricultural year. The 1st of Elul is the new year for animal tithes. All the animals which were born prior to that date belong to the previous year, and are tithed as a single unit. This is during temple times. 1 out of 10 animals was given to the temple. The way this was done, I don't want to go into complications. Sometimes if there was no temple, it would be done in such a way that just the money would be put aside and there would be a blemish, let's say, on the animal. But officially in temple times, it was supposed to be that 1 out of 10 animals of the Bechor, of the firstborn, or the firstborn of the animal, depends, there's a firstborn of the donkeys, etc. There's also the Maaser Behema, there's also the 1 out of the 10 would go to the temple. How is that calculated? It was calculated by what was born on the year from Elul to Elul. Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Shimon say that the new year for animals actually starts the 1st of Tishrei. The third one, the 1st of Tishrei, is the new year for counting years. What year it is? We're now 5782, 5,782. So you count the new year. You know, in Rosh Hashanah of the end of 2020, when it was the Jewish Rosh Hashanah in October, so somebody came over and he said, what festival did you just have? I said, we just had our Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year. I said, really? What year? I said, well, 5,781. Says, wow, can you tell me what happens at the end of 2021? Yeah. Okay, so right, our enumeration is a little bit different than the Gregorian enumeration. So the first of Elul then is for the animals, and the first of Tishrei is when we count for the New Year's, and also the counting of the sabbatical years, the Shemitah years, and also for the counting of the Jubilee years, and also for planting, which is interesting because you would think that'd be Tu Bishvat. But when you plant a tree, the planting is before Rosh Hashanah, but that's concerning the sabbatical year also. The planting for the sabbatical year which means if I plant a tree before Tishrei, it's not part of the sabbatical year. Rabbinically, though, a month was added on, I can't plant even in Elul. I plant only 30 days before the sabbatical year. Okay, are also determining Orla, but okay. The first of Shvat is the new year for the trees, according to Beit Shammai. According to Beit Hillel, which is the point of view that we follow, it's the 15th of Shavat. Now, let me show you something before I continue. We have here 4 Rosh Hashanahs. What are the 4 Rosh Hashanahs? First one, you have the first of Elul. It's a little hard to write this way, but the first of Elul is the Rosh Hashanah for animals. It's called animal tithes. And then what other ones did we have? Sorry, it's just a little bit hard to write on this whiteboard. We had the first of Nisan, right, which was the Rosh Hashanah for counting of years for the kings of Israel specifically. Because if they're not of Israel, what would they care? The kings. Okay, the kings of Israel. And then we have a Rosh Hashanah of the years, which is called the first of Tishrei, which is how we count the years. Also has to do with planting of trees, the sabbatical year. But let's just write years. It happens to include also planting, which is interesting. And then we have the 15th of Shavat, according to Beit Hillel, or the first of Shabbat, according to Beit Shammai. We follow Beit Hillel. 13th day of Shvat, which is called the Rosh Hashanah for the trees. In what sense is it in the Rosh Hashanah for the trees? It's the Rosh Hashanah and the trees for this sense. If I have to give ma'aser, which is the tithe. So let's say I planted the tree last year. When you give the tithe, you give the tithe for all the trees that bore fruit on this year. That's called giving maaser for trees that bore fruit on the same year. What is the same year? The same year is from Tu Bishvat to Tu Bishvat, which means if I planted a tree in, let's say, Elul, it depends when the chanata is. The chanata means when the fruit is starting to blossom. There's actually 3 opinions of what chanata is. One opinion is that the flower fell off and the beginning of the fruit is starting to grow. One opinion is that the fruit is large enough that you could replant it. And another opinion is the fruit is already ripe. All of those are in Hebrew called chanata. So if the chanata of that tree happened before Tu Bishvat, that tree belongs to last year. If the chanata of the tree happened after Tu Bishvat, it belongs to next year. So basically, Tu Bishvat has a technical reason in Jewish law. It's called the division of when it's a different year for the trees. If it started bringing forth its fruit before Tu Bishvat, it belongs to the previous year, and the tithes taken off are together with the trees from the previous year. If it's after that, the tithes are taken off with the trees of the next year. Okay, so it's a very logistical reason to have the 15th of Shabbat. But let's just look at this for a moment. You have 4 days which are called the beginnings of the years.
Sorry, I have a quick question.
Yes.
So, given that we're also in the year of Shemitah, so all the flowers that are going to bloom now after Tisha B'Av would be considered.
Not flowers. We're talking about fruit trees only.
Sorry, that would be considered the 8th year already.
No, excuse me, for the maaser, yes, but during Shemitah there is no maaser.
Okay,
because you only have maaser when you officially own the field, and during the Shemitah we don't own the field. We're not allowed to do business with our fruit. We have to the land lays waste. We haven't planted anything. Only the things that grew wild from the Torah are you allowed to eat, but you're not allowed to do business with it. I don't know if you studied that yet in the laws of Kashrut. So, okay. Just look for remember what you have here. The tree in first of Tishrei is the beginning of the years. By the way, the beginning of the years since Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden. That's our tradition. We actually don't know how long the 6 days of creation were. But our enumeration of 5782 is from when Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden. And then the enumeration starts. That's our 5782. It's also called planting when it comes to sabbatical. So you might say that this is the level, I call this the level of minerals. I don't know if you remember in Aristotelian thinking, nature has 4 levels. The first level is called minerals, rocks. Since it's the beginning of the years, which sounds like the beginning of everything, call it minerals. Next level is plants, trees. Next level is animals. Then the next level is humans. In Aristotelian thinking, which was adopted also by Jewish philosophers and even the Kabbalists, there are 4 levels in nature. And each Rosh Hashanah represents a different level in nature, which has its own beginning, the year. Which has to be understood why. But just the fact that you have this. In Aristotelian thinking, the difference between minerals and plants grow and minerals don't. The way we have one mineral which is edible. Does anybody know which mineral is edible? There's only one. What?
Salt?
Salt, of course.
Okay.
Only salt is edible. You have other minerals in your body, but you can't actually eat them. You have iron in your body, you have silver, you have gold, you have zinc. I mean, there are lots of stuff in there, but you're not going to eat it by itself unless it's a vitamin. But actually something which has a taste is salt. And that's why salt, you can keep it from generation to generation. You can have your grandmother's salt and give it to your grandchildren and it'll still be edible because it's not a plant. It just keeps going. It's like a rock, right? There's a discussion, the laws of Shabbat, whether salt actually cooks. It's a question whether you can put it into your soup on the plata on Shabbat or not. Does it actually cook? There's an argument between Rav Yosef Karo and the Rama concerning this. Anyhow, so that's called minerals. By the way, the reason why we always have salt on the table, we always salt the bread, and the reason why the altar, the Mizbeach in the temple had salt is because the Torah calls it Brit Melach, the covenant of salt, meaning God's covenant with Israel is like salt. It never changes. Because salt never changes. It just continues from generation to generation. Even when you put it in your body, it's still there somewhere. It's in your blood. It doesn't go away. So yeah. Of course, it could go through, but so and that's minerals. Plants grow. Animals move, have movement. That's where they're called animals. How do they move? Because they have a soul. In Greek, anima. They move. Humans have reason, logic, and therefore they're considered above. But it's interesting how this idea seems to be somehow implanted in this Mishnah, which talks about the 4 Rosh Hashanahs. That's phase 1 of my talk. Now, phase 2, I want to talk about, but what is the significance of putting the trees in here, specifically from the plant world? Why specifically the trees and not other types of plants? Okay, there's one tree that masquerades as a vegetable, and that's, of course, an avocado. What exactly are, so let me show you something else. I'm sorry that it's written Ivrit. I didn't have time to translate it. As I'm talking, I will do the translating, okay? Oops, this guy I got to get rid of. He's jumping in there. Here he is. Can you see this? Hebrew? Okay, good. Okay, I call it Parshat Bria Va'ilanot, which means the creation story and trees. Where does it say the word ilan in the Torah? The answer is it doesn't. Ilan is a later word. It's mentioned in the Mishnah. How does the Torah call a tree?
Eights.
Eights. Okay, very good. Now let's just think for a second. What is the relationship between human beings and trees? Usually the first thing that people tell you is the verse in Deuteronomy. The verse in Deuteronomy in Devarim, here it is. The verse says like this: if you shall make a siege on a city during an act of war, lehilachem aleh, while you're battling the city, letofsa, in order to seize the city. In antiquity, they would make a siege to starve the people in the city so that they would give up without war. If that didn't work, they would jump in and break the walls. But first, they would try it the easier way. That's normally how it was done. And that's how Jerusalem was also conquered, by the way, same thing. So if you're going to make a siege on a city in order to battle against it, in order to seize it, do not destroy the trees. Lindoch alea garzen, don't chop them down. Why would you need the trees? You need the trees because after you make the siege, in order to get into the city, you would build ramps. So the Torah says, build your ramps out of regular trees, not out of fruit trees. What's in Hebrew is called eitz atzei srak, which is called trees which don't have fruit. So don't chop down the trees. Ki mimenu tochal, because you eat from these trees. Oto lo tichrot, you shall not cut them down. Now, let me read the verse the way it's supposed to be read. Ki adam eitz hasadeh lavo mipanecha b'matzor. Is a man a tree that you have to destroy it during the siege? In other words, is the tree your enemy that you have to fight against it? Obviously not. So if you need a tree, keep away from the fruit trees because they supply you with fruit and you have to have a certain amount of respect. That's what the Torah says. But the Talmud says that this question can be an answer. Man is like a tree. Now, that sounds like an interesting thing to say, but you would say, but that's not the simple meaning of the verse. So I'm going to show you a lot of verses where you actually have examples of the Torah making comparisons between man and tree. So the first one, which is the less obvious one, is in Genesis, in Bereshit, right at the beginning. Let me explain it like this. I'll try to explain it in a way to make it relatively easy. Let's see if I can do like this and make a new page. Okay, can you see my blank page? Maybe not. I'll open up share again. Every time I move it. Okay, now you can. Okay, so let's do this. This is the creation story. Day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I need more room than that, or else it's not going to work. And then, of course, the 7th day is Shabbat. What was created on day 1? Not everybody at the same time. Light, right? Right? Light. Well, you're right. It says, Bereshit bara Elohim hashamayim va'aretz. At the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. However, Rashi claims that that statement is a general statement. And then it goes into the particulars. But according to simple meaning, you could be right, yes. So light is created on day one. What's created on day two?
Nothing.
The rakia, the firmament. Rakia, between the waters. Firmament between the waters is on day two. It's on day three. Anybody remember day three?
Waters.
Yes, you have the oceans and land. So you have land, but in addition to land, you also have the plants. And you have the trees, which are all on day three. And you even have the bushes which are mentioned in Genesis 2, not mentioned here, but they must have been. So I'm going to assume, putting land aside, I'm going to call it plants, bushes, and trees. One sec, I need this to go from left to right. Okay, so you have here plants, bushes, and trees. Okay. Then on day 4, does anybody know?
The stars, the moon, and
The sun, the moon, the stars. Yes, very good. What's on day 5?
The birds and the fish.
Birds and the fish and the fowl. And what's on day 6?
Humans.
So you have creepy crawling animals called romace. Crawling, walking animals, 2 types. And then humans. Okay. Can't get it in. Well, if I can make this a little bit. Sorry. Layout. Let's see. Okay, let's see if I can do it any better. I just want to get this on the same line so you can figure it out. Okay, crawling and humans. Humans are supposed to be at the end. I think you can figure that out. Okay, now let's just look at what's going on for a moment. If you notice in the creation story, there are 6 days of creation before Shabbat. If you look closely, the first 3 parallel the second 3. On the first day, you have light. On the 4th day, you have light, the sun, the moon, and the stars. Okay? So you have light twice. If I can't move it even. I'm having some problems here. Again, alignment, left. Sorry, it just takes time because of the right and the left. Okay, so again, you have light on the first day, you have the sun, the moon, and the stars on the second day. Okay, so let's have this sun, moon, and stars on the second day. Here, of course, you have also humans. Then, on the second day, you have a division, a firmament between the waters, which divides the upper waters from the lower waters. Now look at day 5. You have the birds in the heavens and the fish in the lower waters. Okay, do you see what's going on here? Now look at day 3. You have plants, bushes, and trees. And on day 6, you have animals that crawl in the plants. You have animals that are as high as the bushes that walk on four, and then you have human beings who stand on two like trees. Are you following me? In other words, we have as if two stories here simultaneously within one story, mimicking each other. Light mimics the sun, moon, and the stars. Firmament, which divides the upper waters from the lower waters, is like the birds flying above in the air, the fish inside the water. And then the third day with the plants, the bushes, and the trees. So you have in the animal kingdom, you have the creepy crawly animals like snakes and whatever, cockroaches. Then you have animals on four, which are the size of bushes, and human beings, which are like trees. They're straight up. Okay, so already you can see that human beings have a certain relationship to trees in this story. Now, before you think that I'm pulling your leg, what happens when Adam and Eve are put into the Garden of Eden? What are they told? The first thing they're told in the Garden of Eden.
Do not eat from the tree.
Aha. It says eat from any tree you want, but there's a tree in the garden called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You're not allowed to eat from that one. That's all they're told about, trees. Nothing else. Something fishy going on here. Okay. So not only do they mimic the tree when you compare the 3 days to the 4, 5, and 6 days, the 1, 2, and 3 to 4, 5, 6, but they're actually in a garden facing two trees. Two trees. Adam and Eve, two trees. Right? Out of all the trees, there are two. So you start to wonder what's going on. By the way, in Hebrew, eitz has the same root of the Hebrew word for advice, eitzah. Eitzah is advice. Two trees, God is giving you two types of advice. What's the two types of advice? One is called the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which means a world where good and evil is going to be part of your life. And then there's another tree called the tree of eternal life. God says, keep away from that one. And if you keep away from that one, you can have the tree of the eternal life. Two types of advice. But as human beings, whenever we're given good advice, you know what we do? We go the wrong way. That's just human nature. So we're told, don't eat from the tree. We eat from the tree. That's just human nature. It's like a 2-year-old, don't touch what's in the toilet bowl. Don't touch what's in the toilet bowl. That's just human nature, We want to find out our independence, and don't touch the fire. It looks nice, but it's hot. You touch it. Ow! Don't eat up the whole sugar bowl. You get a tummy ache. Eat up the whole sugar bowl. That's just if they have the opportunity, because that's right. They call the terrible twos. So because when the human being has the ability to show her independence, the best way to show your independence is by not doing what you're told to do. So Adam and Eve have to go through that stage, I guess. But of course it was, anyhow, so the point is you have Adam and Eve and you together with trees. Since I'm not talking about the Garden of Eden story now, I'm going to jump and show you a whole bunch of places in the Torah where you have this thing with the trees. For instance, let me give you some examples right here. Well, we mentioned, of course, the example of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Here are a few more trees. Jeremiah chapter 17, Jeremiah 17. Blessed is a man who trusts in God, and God is his, meaning trustworthy one. And he will be like a tree which is sitting on a water source, and it sends its leaves and its roots go deep, and he will never see the heat, and his leaves will always be fresh. In the time of drought, he will never have to worry because he will always produce fruit. So Jeremiah is saying in chapter 17, verses 7 and 8, Yirmiyahu is saying that the man who trusts in God is just like that tree who has a water source. Similar verse, Tehillim, chapter 1, verse 1. Happy is the man who did not follow in the ways of the wicked. He will be like a tree which is planted on a water source, who will give its fruit at the right time, and its leaves will never wither, and everything he does will be successful. Again, the righteous man is the tree. Also in Psalms and Tehillim, chapter 92, righteous man is like a date palm, and he will blossom like a date palm, like the cedars of Lebanon will he be successful. And even in old age, he will be ripe and productive. Right? So you have, and in the book of Job, chapter 14, verse 7, for the tree has hope, because even if the tree is cut off, it can always replant itself. And if the tree gets old, you can take its roots and put it into new ground, then it will not die. In fact, it will start to thrive just by the smell of water, and it will make new plants. A man will get weak and die and disappear. Okay, it's a little more negative there, but again, the plant, the tree, and the human being. In Tehillim, it was the righteous man. In Jeremiah, was the righteous man. In Job, it's just people and trees in general. Here's another one from Yeshayahu, chapter 65. Will not be built and will not be settled, will not be planted and nobody will eat from it, because like the life of the tree is the life of my people, and the way of their products will wither their selections. Again, this idea of people being compared to a tree. And of course, the last one, which I think is not here, when Moshe sends the Meraglim, the spies, into the land, he says to them, I want you to check, Yesh ba'etz im ein. Tell me if the land has a tree or not. So Rashi in the Midrash says, what do you mean if it has a tree? Why should the land not have a tree? So Rashi says, what it means, does it have a righteous person?
Righteous person, yes.
A righteous person will have merit, and it'll be very hard to conquer them. So right away, the assumption is the tree is the righteous person, because King David said, Tzaddik katamai yifrach, a righteous person is like, produces fruit like a date palm. So, and I'll show you, and one last place, because it's almost 8 o'clock, this past week's Parsha, it says that they came to Elima. They came to a place called Elima, and in Elima, there were 12 water sources and 70 palm trees. So you would think 12 water sources, of course, reminds you of the tribes. What's 70? It sounds like the 70 who entered Egypt. But interestingly enough, Rashi says differently. He says the 12 palm trees represents the 12 tribes, the 12 water sources, but the 70 trees represents the 70 teachers, Zakanim, the elderly that Moses appoints, who teach the Torah. They're like the tzaddikim. But again, this idea of the water source and the tree, exactly like Tehillim, exactly like in Yirmiyahu. So there seems to be a relationship. One interpretation of the meaning of the relationship is that human beings are like upside down trees. Trees receive their nourishment from the ground. We also receive our physical nourishment from the ground, but our spiritual nourishment comes from above. In that sense, we're very different than trees. So yes, we grow from the ground and we grow from the sun and we eat the produce of the ground, but our spiritual nourishment, which comes to our soul, that comes from above, and that's called the 70 trees or the elders who teach us Torah. So there seems to be a theme going on in biblical literature about this idea of trees and human beings and what you can learn from the trees in order to understand human beings better. For instance, a tree has a stump, but it also has fruit. That's like good deeds, right? The larger part of the tree is on the top, which is its good deeds. It seems to be the purpose of the tree, if you want to look at it that way. There are a lot of interesting things that could be said about this. I will hold it now because now we have to join Rabbi Ariel and the Tu Bishvat Seder, but I hope you got something out of this introduction. And I wish everybody